Welcome back to another Looking for Work session. We do this every week, Tuesday, 4 o'clock noon. Answer questions from the audience. If you have a question about landing your first job in tech, I'm here to help. I will answer the questions for as long as they flow. So if you have a question, the easiest way to get it to me is to just in the chat box, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, Facebook, any of those, Twitch, Twitter. I think the Twitter one works, although I've never watched any videos on Twitter because I'm not a real Twitter user. What do you call a Twitter user? But it is now an option, and so we now send to Twitter. If there's anybody out on Twitter that is listening to this on Twitter live, I guess, let me know how that whole thing works. Probably there's a way for you to submit your comments, but if you can't, the easier channels are like on our YouTube or our LinkedIn. Send me a message. My email's there. So if I get an email, try not to be super rude and look at my computer and email and get buried in it while we're doing this. But be happy to spend some time today just figuring out how can I be helpful. Leverage me. Use me as a resource for making this transition as quick and as seamless as possible. My day job is I run a nonprofit. We have a registered apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor, and we train people for software engineering. So I basically get people paid to learn how to code. So I pay people to learn how to code. So that said, I work with a lot of employers, a lot of hiring managers, engineering teams to identify like what are the core skills that it takes, as well as how do you transition. Right? Perfect example. Somebody just asked a great question. How do you transition from software engineer, from a general IT analyst? And I get this is pretty common. And you can sometimes get kind of stuck inside of these roles where you are great at the job and it doesn't really afford you because you're valuable in that role. The opportunity to have your employer create a pipeline and like help you to elevate your skills and get you into another role. So it's really important that you're designing that pathway for yourself. So how you transition is going to be, there's a lot of different pathways that you could use to level your skill up. That would be the first thing, would be got to increase your skill in software engineering. And then from there, the next question is treating the job search like a job. And so you got to kind of wear that hat of, okay, this is a legit cause for it. I need to do these, execute on these steps in order to be able to transition from the role I have right now into either a move within the same organization or potentially a move outside of your current organization, depending on what their needs are, their capacity. But I'd start internally inside your organization. If you have software engineering roles inside, that's the best place to start. So I would say skill-wise, the way that you'd skill yourself varies. There's the immersive coding bootcamp option. So that's 3 or 4 months, compressed time period, but it does usually require you to be investing in this full time. So it's more than 9 to 5. It's usually like 8 to 10 hour days for 3 or 4 months. Pay tuition for one of those programs varies, but the national average is around $12,000. And then at the end of that period, you are ready to get into an engineering role. And I kind of assume that you don't currently have software engineering skills, but if you already have software engineering skills, you can skip that first part. So coding bootcamp is one way. You can self-teach. You can take courses online. So there's online boot camps. And then you can apply to a program like ours, an apprenticeship program that will provide you some experience. So all of those would be different methods that you can use to gain a skill. And then you got to put on your hat of, okay, my job is to find a job. And that requires reaching out. So in your case, if you're inside an organization, reach out to folks on the engineering team. You've probably already established relationships. And so that could be an easy way for you to kind of pivot inside of the organization. If you can't, then it's about following all of the other steps that I would recommend for anybody, which is you got to be networking. Most of the jobs are not posted. They get announced internally by teams, and the engineering manager or lead says, hey, you've got an opportunity to add to our team. If you know anybody that's interested, let them know there's a position available. That happens 9 times out of 10. So you got to kind of have your ear to the ground. And then at that point, once you're kind of out there in the network, then it's the follow-ups. It's making sure that you have, direct contact with internal champions that can help make sure that your resume gets to the top of the pack. And that's really it. That's the secret. The secret is skill up first, networking. If you gain the skill and you do a great job at networking, you'll be fine. You can make the transition pretty fast, pretty easily. Core skills. Good news is you probably have some of those already as an analyst. So got to be able to communicate, got to be able to problem solve, got to be able to collaborate with other people. If you've got those core, then it really comes down to like attention to detail, diligence, and some of those core software engineering skills. Like, can you actually code, right? Even if it's not super fancy, right? You're at the early part of your career, you still have to have some foundation of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that you can start building on, start leveling yourself up. So hopefully that helps. That's like the core. It's much more skewed towards soft skills than it is the more technical skills. And depending on the size of the organization, so it goes without saying, if you work at a really large tech organization, they have to build usually scalable products and services and applications. And so building at Walmart scale is going to mean something different than building at small, scrappy startup where they need more generalist software engineers, but a large organization that has scalable software, they have needs for people that have a real good grasp on data structures and algorithms and some of those more architectural components of building software that are harder to pick up, frankly, and require a little bit more effort to get yourself to the skill level where that would be a good fit. So that might mean that depending on where you are, you might be looking more towards smaller size organizations that you can get a foot in the door, or transitioning inside your organization if you can pick up those core skills. Roadmap. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know of a great way to help with like all the various ways people feed into this, but I can tell you that it's not a linear, like you do this thing first and then you do this thing. It's much less linear and much more about picking where you want to be and then finding out how do you create a sustainable way for you to get there, which might mean working on this part-time weekends and building a hobby that can later become a career path, or it might mean a very traditional going to a 4-year computer science engineering program, or it might be going from an associate's program at a community college. And then once you've got your general stuff done, transitioning. So because of that, I don't really have like a resource that I point people to and say, this is the best path. Because there is so much of a non-linear progression that many of the folks that I help take to get to that role. It's very often not the most direct route. Like graduate from high school, go to college, get a degree, or get a job. It's much more usually like all over the place. So hopefully that gives you hope that it is possible for you to transition from just about anywhere you are into a role doing software engineering. How does a new programmer deal with being overwhelmed when learning? I find myself being overwhelmed, want to just do something else. So that can be tough if you are going it alone and you're not using like a real curated curriculum, then one, it could mean that in many cases it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose, because there is a fire hose of information on the internet. When I was first learning how to code, we had these tiny little books because there wasn't like, this is not a big thing, right? We were fortunate enough, 30 plus years ago to have a home computer, and there was a little book that came along with like GW Basic, and the book was a little binder, and it had literally just the documentation for the programming language. That was it. If you want to learn how to program, you sit down and you read the documentation. And in that case, I was just desperate for resources, and eventually you started getting books with like little snippets of code and actually seeing like, oh, this is how someone constructs an actual application. And now it's the 100% opposite. There's a ton of resources, a ton of information online, and it comes at you. And the best thing I could suggest is really start looking at, even if you don't want to sign up for like one of the online programs, look at the syllabus, look at what are the core things that they cover, and try and make sure that you're creating an even distribution of what you're trying to focus on and not just like going super deep. I was telling someone this the other day. I find, and this is pretty common, developers that are self-taught have super deep knowledge of really odd things because you don't have any like filter or gateway to tell you to stop. That's enough of that topic. You're not going to use any more of that yet. Move on to this other thing. And so you might like have these deep pockets of knowledge and you've gone down the rabbit hole and you've invested a lot of time not knowing that you probably won't use that information for like 3 or 4 more years. And it's getting that solid base across, you know, the fundamentals that you will use in the near future, that you will use like every day in the next like 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and you'll build on that. It's called T-shaped experience. It's very general, deep experience in an area or domain that you work in. When you're trying to find a job, you want to have that across the board experience, full stack if it's possible, and just be patient with yourself. And know that you're going to feel uncomfortable, you're going to feel overwhelmed for a really long time. And one of the significant differences between a senior engineer and someone that's early is I don't allow the lack of understanding how something works to stress me out. There's a lot of stuff, I don't know how it works. And you just deal with it when it's important, right? Like, I don't know the molecular structure of oil in my vehicle. I just know how to check the dipstick, make sure it's got enough in it, make sure, you know, when you change the oil, you run like all of the mechanics around it, but you don't have to go super deep on it. You need to know in general, right? Do I want to have, you know, synthetic oil or do I want to have non-synthetic, right? Like, just need to know the broad strokes. You can fill in the rest. Then just don't stress over it, right? There's experts that'll help you figure out the more detailed stuff when you need that information. Hope that helps. Do I know of some great boot camps in California or virtually? Sure. So shout out to Sabio up in LA, great program. Codesmith, also in LA, great program. Stay away from any of the ones that are run by Trilogy, not great programs. General Assembly tends to not be great. They tend to be sort of like middle of the pack in terms of placement outcomes. That's what I look at. And that's what a lot of employers want to see. If they're seeing a lot of students coming from a code school, they can very quickly tell whether or not it's a quality program. Are folks getting jobs? Are they ready for the jobs, or if they're not? So if you're looking for a online program, App Academy's got a pretty good online program. Thinkful's pretty good. Been around for a really long time. But I would make sure that wherever you go, you also check and find out, ask some recent grads. You know, you'll be able to see on LinkedIn people that have graduated from the program, ask them what their experience is like. See if they're getting jobs, right? Really do your homework. Most people that sign up for an immersive coding bootcamp, they talk to one admissions person. At the one school they reach out to, they talk to one person. And you're not getting a very good representation of, you know, what the placement statistics and numbers might be. Every school that operates in California has to have on its website something called a student performance fact sheet. Look at those fact sheets. Every school in California has to report what the outcomes are for the program, except programs that are run under the universities. Like I said, the Trilogy programs. So you want to avoid programs that don't publicly disclose their outcomes and performance. So I would shy away from any ones that are run through programs at a university where they don't report those numbers. Focus on the ones that are private, independent, and actually report those numbers. So, you know, the App Academies, the Hack Reactors, you know, General Assemblies, again, middle or lower of the pack. Codesmith, really good. Sabio's really good. Like, those are excellent programs. So Thinkful online, good programs. And obviously ours, right? I mean, ours is an apprenticeship. So ours is top shelf because we have 100% placement. Everybody gets a job in our program. But we have such a limited capacity. Not everyone can get into our program because, like, it's tough business. I can only hire so many people and get them jobs. But trust me, I'm growing as fast as I can. I'm trying it. I'm doing it. So Hannah asks, as a beginner coder, do I recommend focusing on getting a good grasp of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript first before learning it? Absolutely. So you are on the right track. That's a great question. I like to tell folks to understand the basics first, get super solid in JavaScript. JavaScript, I mean, it happens to be, you know, I got a little personal, favorite because, I run the JavaScript community in San Diego, and I've been using JavaScript for many years. But it's also the language that works in the browser, right? So if you're going to build anything that's going to be web-based, browser-based, JavaScript's the way to go. You could also use it on the server side. If you get super solid on one language first, JavaScript, when you have a need to learn another backend language, Python, C#, Java, something else, Ruby on Rails, then it will be way easier for you to transition. But don't jump around. While you're out there looking for a job, don't, because you see a PHP posting and because you see a job with Ruby on Rails and you see a job with C# and Java, you try and let me learn a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. Instead, stay and go deep with JavaScript and then pick your next one. And what I usually recommend folks is pick the next one based on your current job market. And if you're trying to get a job regionally here in the US, figure out, in your region, what are people using? Are they using a lot of Java because that's what's being taught in the colleges? So a lot of the enterprise organizations will teach Java because the licenses are less expensive for them to build code in Java. And people coming out of college with CS degrees will know the language. C++, C#. Make an educated decision after you've mastered that first one. Get the first one under your belt. You can spend a good year, 2 years with the first one, and you'll be good to go for a while. Then you'll find that, in San Diego, a lot of C#. You have a lot of biotech and life sciences and defense contractors. A lot of them use C# or Java. Matthew, similarly, I think jack of all trades. I don't want to say jack of all trades because that makes it sound like you want to have a ability to jump in anywhere and do anything. I liken it more to just the fundamentals, which over time you'll see. Understanding the fundamentals across the board is not the same as trying to be a jack of all trades. Not the same. Yeah. That's the best way I can just say. You'll see. Over time you'll see that it's not quite the same. A jack of all trades meaning there are some fundamentals you need to know, but those are really fundamentals. Those do not really translate to being a specialist or having the capacity to do everything across the board, but just not super well. It's not actually the case. A little different than that. And yep, I think we answered that question. Thoughts on learning React? Sure. So I think React is kind of the new, this is going to sound terrible saying it, it's the new jQuery. So jQuery took over, was dominant in the space for a while, and everyone was building things using jQuery. And so the next big wave of everyone doing it was React. And it kind of became more popular and faster than what we saw with Angular and what other folks came along and did around the time that React was emerging. So Ember and Vue are two other frameworks and not libraries that facilitate being able to really quickly build out and maintain scalable front-end applications. And I think if you had a choice to learn any of those three first, 4 or 5, the popular leading libraries and frameworks, I would choose React. We teach React first because it's a small library. So the difference between a library and a framework is a library is just enough tools for you to do a specific thing, and a framework is much bigger and gives you all the components that encompass building, something on the front end, right? So you might also have a router and state management and all these other things. React, you do just the view, and everything else you have to kind of bolt it on, right? And so there are solutions that everybody that does React will include that are common, but it's not a prescribed solution. Like when you use React, you don't have to use Redux, although many people do use Redux. With Angular, it's Angular has its state management. Ember has its state management. So those tools are a little bit more rigid. They do allow you, if you learn them, to code much faster. But that's the difference between learning something that's smaller, which I'm always in favor of, learning something that's small, more foundational, and then you can build upon that knowledge. And you can quickly, once you learn React, learn Vue. Once you've learned React, You can learn just about any other framework or library faster because you've mastered some of the core, easier things. So I like React. I think it's very fast and flexible. I think a lot of developers like those aspects. They don't like being restricted and told there's these predefined rules and tools that they have to use. So that's my take on it. You got me. I like React. But it has become sort of like ubiquitous, like jQuery. So I don't see any reason why, if you're going to pick one, you don't have any, like, you don't have a dog in the fight. You're just like, I want to learn the next thing after the basics of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery. What's next? React, for most cases. That's a very opinionated opinion, but hey, you know me. I once gave a talk about tabs versus spaces, and I have strong opinions about semicolons. So don't get me started there. Oh, good question. Christopher, late to the party. That's okay. I'll cover it again. We covered this a little earlier, but it's kind of, I think, the same thing, and this is good. It's a reoccurring question that people have. If you're doing something other than software development and you want to transition, there's two things you got to do. One, you got to gain the additional skill so that you have the core attributes so that you can be productive as an early career developer. And then the second is you got to follow all the rest of the advice I share about looking for work, right? Start internally, see if you can find internal champions and an internal opportunity for you to cut over onto the other team. That means, building relationships with the engineering managers, with the senior engineers, with a team, so that you can say, hey, I've been taking these courses online. I've built some of these passion projects. Take a look at the stuff that I've built and get an opportunity to just kind of like shift focus inside the organization. If that's not going to work for a variety of reasons, hey, that's not the right path, then you got to put your hat on and you got to treat the job search process like a job and do all the other pieces that I usually talk about, right? So first, skill, though. Make sure that you got the skill first. Don't go prematurely and say, hey, I want to get onto a career path of being an engineer. I think you'll be way better off if you actually spend some time tuning up, because I know you got some skills. I know you went through a program. So, and then from that point, once you've kind of tuned up and you're in good shape and you're feeling like, okay, I got a couple small passion projects that I can kind of walk through and talk about, that's when you want to have that conversation. Because then you can bring something to the table that shows you're serious about it. And I think that would be helpful. Someone asked earlier about transitioning from an analyst role into development. Having something to nerd out and talk about with the engineers and the engineering team, that's your ticket. That's the ticket. We love nerding out and like looking at code and like helping somebody that's like early on make that transition. So, but do it not on the hope and a dream, like, hey, I'd love to work on the engineering team, but like do it on like, hey, I've started actually like taking this class on the weekend. Oh my goodness, no signal. All right, technical difficulties. I don't know why we're having no signal, but don't move anything. Don't touch anything. Don't move anything. So, I don't know why it does that, but every once in a while. Matthew, good. Another question. Is there a time of the year that companies ramp up on hiring? Yes. Is it all over the place? So because it depends. And for different companies, it depends on their business. A lot of companies have their fiscal year that ends. And when their fiscal year ends, it helps them set their budget. And then right after the fiscal year ends, their budget is set. Then they know when they can hire. They know who they can hire and how they can hire. And all that happens. That doesn't happen like December through like January through December. It usually happens somewhere like in the middle of the year. So like June, July, August, September, October, their year ends and the next year starts. And so what that generally means is, although it's not the start of the year, January is sort of the signal that we're through the holiday season and the managers and the HR people are now back and everybody that's a decision maker is back and they can actually start making offers to people. So that's why it seems like it picks up in January and February and March. And that's sort of like the strong hiring season for engineers. But the work for that starts months earlier because the budgets have already been set in the fourth quarter, but no one's hiring in the fourth quarter, usually. the other thing is also true. Agencies and shops that do like retail and e-commerce, they're super busy. And so the great time to get hired into there is like October, November. And then they're so busy, they can't do any hiring in December because they're literally just like building the plane while it's flying in December, working super hard to like get pages out and design and get HTML out, all those kinds of things through the holiday season. And then everything just kind of like collapses in the retail, like in January. And then all the other like line of business application, all the other like big tech companies and all that, like they're just now, everybody's back. Let's ramp up. January's got a good strong few months before the summer comes, and then people are out of school, vacations are happening again, and the hiring slows down. So it's kind of cyclical based on like HR and budget, and also the needs of business. Some businesses, like, they are really strong during tax season because like they work on tax software, right? So it could be very cyclical, but it's also not necessarily always intuitive. And that's why there are certain times of the year where some industries are hiring like crazy, and then other times are like super slow. But always keep that in mind. Like anytime it's around holidays or times where there could be like vacations, the hiring can be kind of painful because the decision makers are all on vacation and it can't get everybody to line up and just approve making a hiring decision. So, oh yeah, separate question in there too. So I got the first two. Also, when it comes to React, would I need some knowledge of Node and NPM packages? Kind of, sort of, not really. So I think you can pick up enough about Node to understand that you can either create a small Express server that you can use to like host the pages and get the pages to be able to be like, to be able to dev and just have a dev environment set up. But you won't need an extensive amount of backend knowledge of Node in order to just like get started with React. I mean, the amount you have to learn, you can learn in a couple hours. It's not a lot. And in some cases, there are a few commands that you could learn. So in just like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, you could learn the minimum to use like create React app, right? Which will bring up a server that you can use as a dev server. So you really don't have to tackle any of those additional challenges of learning Node until you get ready to deploy your application. Then you kind of need to know a little bit about backend, but you could just as easily learn Python or something else and just use NPM as like a package manager to manage your dependencies. It's entirely possible. So I don't want you to feel like you have to learn Node. You could learn Express in Node, or you could learn, you can avoid that altogether. You could use like a little LAMP server. You could use WAMP or XAMPP and just have like a LAMP server that you use to host your pages. It's probably too much flexibility. I've just given you the fire hose to drink out of. But I don't want you to get locked in and your brain think like, oh, the only way I can be a good React developer is I have to learn a lot of Node. Not necessarily. But it's not hard. It's not challenging. It'll be all right. Matthew asks a question. Sometimes it takes weeks or even months to get a call back or email about application. So apply heavily around April, May. No, I wouldn't do that. Don't wait. Get it in. So if you're looking for a job, as soon as you're ready, you should start applying. Don't try and time the market. It's not going to be helpful. And there's going to be some lead up and some work involved in terms of like making the connections and making sure that you've got internal champions that are going to pull for you. So when you do find a good opportunity, you're like, oh man, this is a perfect job. I can definitely do this. This is the company I want to work at. You're going to then, instead of going the HR route and saying, oh, I'm going to try and get a hold of the HR person, and like, no. You're going to get a hold of an engineering manager, someone that could potentially be the hiring manager on that side. And you're going to build a relationship with them so that when you submit your application, they will internally be trying to make sure that you at least get a phone screening, right? And you got to remember, a lot of organizations, they'll do like a little hiring bonus if you refer someone and they end up getting hired. Now you have to stay, right? But that's like their incentive, that if they identify someone that could be a good fit, there's a financial reward in many cases for them, making sure that they surface that candidate to the HR team. So you're going to go that route around HR, versus going straight beeline for like HR manager who's just gonna like shut you down. So, apply online, right? Send me your resume, and then nothing happens with it. You need internal champions. You need people in your corner saying, "Hey, this person, have we scheduled a phone interview with them?" Small, short anecdote. I have a buddy of mine, and they applied at a company that I work for, and I was not the hiring manager, but I was an influencer at the time. So as a influencer in the hiring decision, I was like, hey, you should apply for this role. And they applied, and their resume immediately went to trash. They didn't get a phone interview, nothing. So I was like, what the heck? So I went and I said, hey, did so-and-so apply? And they said, yeah, they applied, but it didn't look like they had the background that matched the role. So like, we're not going to, I'm like, that's my referral. Let's schedule a phone screening because we want to talk to them. The team wants to talk to this person. She was like, oh, okay. I'll get right on that. Like, I didn't know, didn't realize. So we send the person a practice test or a code challenge. It's part of our screening process. We had like these short little code challenges. And instead of sending them the correct code challenge, they sent them the wrong code challenge. They sent them the code challenge for a different role. So they submitted it, and they're like, I was terrible. Like, I tried my best, but it was terrible. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you should have easily been able to do that code challenge. And they were like, well, it had a lot of like stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So needless to say, I had to push again a second time as an internal champion and say, what test did we send this person? I think we might have sent them the wrong test, and that's why they didn't score well. And so we need to make sure we send them the right version of the test. And sure enough, once that happened, the rest of the process was really smooth. I didn't have to intercede anymore. But I had to intercede 2 times. Twice I had to pull someone out of the waste bin, right? Where their resume was like out, done. Twice. And that person ended up getting an offer. I had them, they were great. So keep that in mind. That's why you need to not just apply. You need to have internal champions so that you can have someone playing defense to make sure your resume doesn't end up in the waste bin. You will know you are ready when talk to some senior engineers. Talk to some folks and show them what you're working on and see what they have to say. If you feel super confident, which you probably won't, but if you feel super confident, then just apply. And when you start showing people your resume and your work product, your portfolio, and some of the passion projects you're working on, at that point, they'll be like, oh, yeah, you're ready for an entry-level role. Or they'll be like, no, I don't think you have enough experience. That's the key. When someone generically wants to just like tell you like you're not ready yet, they won't tell you you're not ready yet. They'll tell you, I think you need more experience. And then as a new person, when you hear that, I think you need more experience, you think, well, how am I going to get experience if I don't have a job? And if I need experience to get a job, then it's not a catch-22. It is not a catch-22. You can get experience. The way you get experience is you work on passion projects. That's how you get meaningful experience that you can show you can do this kind of work. So you have to work on passion projects, which remember, this is not like buying lumber when you're like a craftsman trying to get better at building furniture or making wood instruments. You don't have to pay for really expensive wood. You're paying for your electricity, right? To keep your laptop powered on. That's it. That's your only cost. The rest is investing your time. So you invest your time, get better at it, build some projects, and then share it with some folks and ask some folks that are actually in the industry, hey, what do you think of my portfolio? What do you think of the projects I'm working on? And you'll see their eyes get super big when you're like, I'm not sure if I should be applying yet. And they're like, oh, you should definitely be applying. Or they'll tell you, I think you need more experience, which should translate to you as you just need more time and more projects that you have under your belt before you have all the skills where someone will very quickly decide, oh yeah, you're worth having a conversation with about this job. And that conversation might translate into an interview. And then after that, okay, the interview went well. Here are some things that we know you need to work on. Here are some other things we know you've got. And we know we can get you where you need to be in the first, 3 to 6 months. So we're going to make you an offer. We know you're going to grow. And at some point, you'll be one of the more productive members of the team, but we're willing to invest in you. That's what they're saying when they hire an early career developer. We are willing to invest and grow your skill set and have you contribute to our team. And so it's not really about a specific skill that you need to have. Once you have the other soft skills, you got enough where people can identify, okay, if I hire Matthew now, he'll be contributing to the team in 6 weeks or 4 weeks, or whatever that number is. If they can't figure that out, they'll tell you, oh, you don't have enough experience. When you get some more experience, then let's talk. Because they can't envision in their mind when you'll be at the point where you can actually like just be pulling tickets, working independently, all that kind of stuff, which isn't going to happen right away. You'll be able to start working on tickets, but you won't be like completely autonomous and working on your own probably for a really long time. Really long time. There really is no online test. Nope. That's an easy one. No, I wish it were that simple. Because then we'd have like, an industry standard test that people could use. Then, of course, recruiters would be giving everybody that test. Like, oh, if you can pass this test, then I can just like bring you straight through and introduce you to the hiring manager. But they don't want to introduce you to the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager be like, why do you have me waste my time talking to that person, right? So that's the dynamic that's at play between the talent and the HR people and the ever insatiable desire that the engineering team has for senior engineers. Like, I want someone that can just come in and can crush it and can write code and like just be super productive. And I don't want to have to help them train or develop or anything. Like, that's where I'll pay tons of money for that resource. Oh, they're not available? Okay, well then maybe I'll hire mid-level. Oh, there's no mid-level? Okay, I guess I got to hire some junior engineers and train them. And that's where you come in. That's your opportunity. If you don't have an internal champion, you got to create them. They're out there. There's a lot of nice folks. And if you just start reaching out, networking on LinkedIn, going to meetups, if they're virtual, participating in virtual meetups, you got to get out there and you got to get out of your comfort zone for most folks. If your comfort zone is you like cold calling and meeting new people, then you're going to be fine. But for a lot of software engineers, they hate it. It's like the most painful thing. And so because they're not willing to do that, they struggle in the job search because it's much more about networking than it is about being able to code. You're going to have some foundational skill, but you're going to have to be like willing to network. You can't just be like, well, I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm just going to submit my resume. That's it. If they can't look at my resume and tell without like me having to like, go introduce myself to people and talk about the work that I'm doing and why I'm passionate about this. And like, it's like, if you're not willing to do that work, it's going to take you a long time to find a job. A long time. So the sooner you can get used to that as part of the process, the faster the job search process will go for you. Senior reps. I would hit up Meetup Groups, and then some Meetup Groups are meeting more virtually, so you can also try Slack groups. So San Diego JS has a Slack channel, so you can check out sandiegojs.org and then go to the Slack channel, and in the Slack channel there's different channels, so you can just put a note in there and say, hey, can someone take a look at my portfolio? Or, hey, this is a passion project I'm working on. Anybody interested in taking a look at my GitHub, right? And I'm sure you'll find tons of people. There are some bigger ones that are a little bit noisy. So if you seek out, I'm sure that there's like a super huge, like JavaScript Slack group, not the San Diego one, but like just an open Slack community. And there'll be hundreds of people in there, right? And so it's not really about how, so like, which is the one that's the fastest, or which is the one that's like going to give you the best feedback. But that's where I would go first, because you can get like real-time feedback. You can just jump into a channel and say, here's a link. Can anybody, give me some feedback? And then there's all sorts of like boards would be a better way of describing them, like communities where you can post something and then you just have to wait for the person to respond. So there's lots of communities. If you just look for like software or special interest groups, and then use like JavaScript, jump on Reddit. This is like perfect for Reddit. So find a Reddit community, and I'm sure there'll be people there who'd love to provide you support. And I say that kind of laughing because you may also take some criticism, but you gotta have a thick skin, right? And so those are be places where I think very low hanging fruit for you to get feedback from someone. Christopher Lim, how can you make your passion project stand out and be unique? I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like, just do it. You know, I can't tell you what your passion is. So, but what I can say is like, make it around something that you're interested in. Like I picked up drumming over the COVID vacation that we've had for this last year or so. And so if I were going to build a passion project right now, it'd probably be something around like drumming or MIDI so that I could, you know, actually do two of the things that I enjoy doing now, drumming and coding. So not sure what it is that you're into, but that's what I would start with first. And then rather than trying to make your project unique, I would focus on the constraints that I usually recommend, keeping it short and small so you can finish it and not have something that's going to like just hang out there and never be finished, like a painting that's never done. And you also probably don't want to have it be something that's you'll lose effort or you'll lose enthusiasm. It'll be harder and harder for you to close it out if it takes more than like 2 weekends to get done. So try and sandbox or time box it to a couple weekends and then move on to something else that's interesting. See if you can pick up some new skill in the projects that you're picking. That's what I would do. I wouldn't so much worry about like, how do you make the project impressive for folks? Try and make it more useful for yourself, because the goal is that for not to be painful for you. Like I sit down and I practice the drums every day and it's not painful. Like I look forward to it. And if you're not looking forward to working on the passion projects and instead you're trying to figure out how do I trick someone into like liking my passion project so they'll hire me, you're doing it for the wrong reason. Just have fun. Pick something that you're, you know, I know people that like to gamble a little bit. So like they're always trying to come up with ideas about how can I build like a machine learning model to help me predict who's going to win the tournament or who's going to win, you know, a football game, basketball game. And I'm like, you do know you're not going to make any money. I know, but it's not that. It's not the, you know, winning. It's like applying coding to something that you enjoy doing. That's what you got to figure out. I think clean. Like if we're looking at a difference between a project that's clean, minimalist design, and like it's got that extra wow fancy with like things shaking and like glowing and moving around and stuff. I don't think you need to really do any of that. If you can really have good balance, good color selection, good like symmetry on the page, contrast, you can make it mobile responsive. So focus more on responsive than anything that's like flashy and like it doesn't need to have all kinds of stuff. The best side, I always tell people like, man, Apple usually does a really, really good job. So look at Apple and like try and steal from people that are doing things really well. Look at Google, right? Very simple, very plain, but it's utilitarian, right? You get it, get what you need, get in there and get out. So that's what I would think about as you start like, how can you make it attractive? I tend to not worry about like bells and whistles and fancy stuff and more about like, how can I make it like very clean, and it should like not attract a whole lot of attention. It shouldn't be like, like a little too, I don't know, too fancy. I don't like to be too fancy. This isn't like Pimp My Ride where we're trying to make it all crazy. We're just trying to make it like tight and can serve the one purpose of whatever the tool is, or whether you build a calculator or you built a, you know, something that pulls into an API and just displays a dashboard, you know, whatever it is, whatever the utility is. Martin, new to coding, what type of projects do I recommend? And do I think C programming is a good foundation? C's hard, man, starting in a tough spot with C. C is great for like embedded devices. If you're doing anything where you're trying to like move robotics around, or, you know, driving a CNC machine, or really any of that like Internet of Things, C is great, very efficient, but also a lot of work. So I would say if you're working in C, sure, it's a good foundation. It's not where I would pick to start for most people because it's just going to not be very fun. There's not a lot you can get done because you can't produce a high volume of code, especially as a new person. There just is not much that you'll be able to execute in C to entertain most people. The best way to think about it is like it might just be kind of hard and boring, but if you're building like robots or you're building things with like Raspberry Pis, C is like kind of the way to go. You're building like a little embedded device or software that's going to live on like a phone or on a wristwatch or something like that. Anything that's going to connect and need to like, connect to a heart rate monitor or something like that, C might be a great choice. So it is a solid foundation, but you may find more interest outside of C if you're trying to do more like web development versus embedded devices. So it is a solid foundation. It's tough because it's considered a low level language, so I should probably say why. And because it's one of the earlier languages and it actually serves as the foundation that other languages leverage under the hood, they're written in C. It means that you've got to manage a lot more of the process. So you have to learn and understand how to manage threads and how to manage memory and like a lot of things that other languages that are not low level but are high level means that you don't have to deal with all those things. The language and the compilers may deal with some of those issues for you. And so C is both great and powerful because it is a low level language, but that does mean that you have to do more. You have to put more effort forward to get less bang for your buck. So it takes a lot of effort to build something even small in C versus the amount of volume of things that you could build if you're building with like C#. That little sharp makes all the difference in the world because they really do. They're going to feel completely different. The language itself is going to be completely different, right? It will share some of the same roots, but the experience is brutal in the low level language. All right, we're getting a lot of questions now. That's good. Yeah, clean pages. But yeah, if you can do the wow factor, and a lot of shops are looking for that in their front end engineers. They're looking for things that are like super, like kind of leveraging, parallax and all kinds of like kind of cool stuff. So I get it. I dig it. Yep. Apple's got all kinds of stuff that, again, parallax is the best example. You scroll down on the page and the laptop opens up and like all that magic stuff. So want to become famous, buy followers, primes, and viewers on big follows? No, not really. I think so. LeetCode is one of, I'd say, like the top 3 or 4 places where people go to do coding exercises and code challenges. I don't really have an opinion about whether it's better or it's just one of the more popular ones. My suggestion would be if you are working on algorithms and you want to get better algorithms to be able to, like, let's say, get an interview at a big tech company, then just make sure when you're doing any of those code challenges, do them with someone else. Pair program. Because what you want to be able to gain out of the experience is not just solving the problem, but being able to communicate your thought process and the problem-solving process and how you're going about solving it. By doing it on your own, if you're just sitting there banging out LeetCodes every day on your own, it's not nearly as valuable because during an interview, if that's what you're prepping for, if you're prepping for an interview, you want to be able to explain your thought process. Explain how you went about solving the code challenge and not just like sit there and quietly solve it on your own. So it is useful, but not nearly as useful as doing it with another person. And the various ways that you could do that, you can structure it. You can structure it that you do a problem and then you explain how you're doing it, or they do a problem and they explain how you do it, or you collaborate and you think and you talk about how you might approach the problem, and then you kind of code it together by one person talking as a navigator and the other person is the driver and inputting the code, that kind of thing. So try and get the most out of that experience. you'll need to be able to design efficient, small algorithms to code challenges, and there will be lots of times where you have to like use the same skills that you'd use during a code challenge in the real world. You'd be surprised, but there won't necessarily be the need for you to do it in like the fewest lines of code. Instead, the way you'll want to probably solve a lot of those code challenges is thinking about how you write the code in a way where it's easily maintainable so other people can come along and understand the code and maintain it. So you'll want to be able to think through not just how we're going to solve this problem, but how we're going to solve the problem and make sure that I can read this code and remember what it does after the weekend, right? Because if you write something on Friday and you write it in a super fancy, I only took 2 lines to write this code, versus if you wrote it in a way where it's simpler and easier to maintain and could still, be pretty efficient, but it's not optimized for efficiency. It's optimized for human readability. Maybe easier for you to keep your job by being able to fix it again when it needs adjusting or tweaking down the road. Just my 2 cents. Just my real world experience. I've seen a lot of early career developers that will do that. They'll write a solution in a really complex and elegant way, and they'll be like, but none of the rest of your team knows what that means. So you might want to like write it in a way where people can actually understand what you're doing and not in the fancy way that only took 1 line. Because that ain't helping anybody, including you, when you're not going to be able to fix it next week when you can't remember what you were doing and why you did it that way. And everybody on the team is just like, oh man, rookies. They'll admire it for like a few minutes and then they'll just be like, okay, this is nonsense. You need to fix this. Over-engineered. All right, homebody, doesn't have many friends, work 2 jobs, go to school, learn programming, 2 kids. How do I find a lead code partner? Ooh, yeah. So finding somebody else that's at your skill level or around your skill level could be helpful. But what I would suggest is, and that's not the best use of Free Code Camp, but Free Code Camp has some chat channels. So you might be able to find someone that's like going through the Free Code Camp program and is looking for someone to pair up and do code challenges with. Then again, reach out to your local meetup groups. Find the local JavaScript meetup group. Find the local whatever other languages that you're into. Find the local React group and see if there's anybody there. You only need like 1 person. Find someone that's going to a local coding bootcamp. See if they'd be willing to like, jump on a hangout once a week for like hour and a half, twice a week, whatever it is. Build a habit. That's how I would solve it. I don't generally tend to worry too much about like, okay, this is going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be hard. But if you just like put your mind to it, I think you'd be all right. I think you'd be good. All right, we're coming up on the end of the hour. If there are any other questions, feel free, fire away. Matthew has been just like legitimately leveraging this time. So, hey, I love it. I appreciate it because if you're getting a lot of value out of it, that's why I do it. It'll shorten that journey for you, for sure. If there are no other questions, seems like it's kind of slowing down a little bit, then I'm going to hit up the fridge for some lunch. I think we're having sandwiches today, which is, it's decent. It's decent lunch. Yeah, well, when you say we could talk for hours, I'm the one actually talking. You're typing, so it's a little easier to type the questions, but I get where you're going. I mean, I do really enjoy being able to like help bring clarity to what is not often intuitive. It just amazes me how like, yeah, this doesn't work the way anybody might think that the job process works, or the way you actually can like very quickly get from like no skill to the skill that you need to like a job, and then from that first job get from like 70 grand to like over 100 grand. It's like super doable. You know, I had a weirdest dream too last night. I had this dream that like I was giving a talk. I wasn't weird because I was like, I wasn't giving a talk, but I had to give a talk after somebody else gave the talk because the person got up and basically told everybody that like, if you're not making this certain amount of money, then you're doing it wrong and you could be making so much more money. And I was just like, wait, what are you talking about? And they're like, you only need to be coding for a short period of time and then you'll be making more than $100,000. And I was like, wait, okay, I got to get up after this person and tell everybody this is not true. What this person just said is not true. You can make a lot of money. You can go fairly quick in your career, but you're not going to pick up a book and learn how to code and then 6 months later be making six figures. The world doesn't quite work that way. You can do really well. And, you know, in a program like ours, there's opportunities for you to get paid to learn how to code. There's amazing opportunities, but you want to set realistic goals. And so the goal of like working real hard and having it pay off is the way it works. This is not a get rich quick scheme. This is not something where it's going to be super easy and then you're going to make a ton of money. It's super hard. It is super hard. And the one thing I give as a caveat to that is because it's challenging, that's why you get paid a lot of money. And that's why everybody's not doing it, right? It's going to require some work. And because it requires some work and effort, that's what separates those that are going to be successful and get paid really good money and those that are just going to be like, well, I tried it, but like it was really hard. And so I gave up. Like learn how to play the drums, man. It's not easy. You can't just sit down and play a musical instrument. You gotta practice. Hannah, you are welcome. Martin, don't worry about being old. Your bigger problem than your age is going to be your lack of the ability to code. So I have a lot of older folks say, yeah, I'm a little older and I'm afraid that, you know, people will discriminate against me because I'm older. Nope. They love, in most cases, they love the real world experience, the fact that you bring maturity to the table, the fact that you have experience in certain spaces and domains, and that you could be a really great employer and not going to have to worry about like the immaturity that they might have with somebody that's like new. But the problem is that while you're thinking that the age is your thing and you're worried about that, what you should be worried about is just getting better at the skill and allowing that to be the thing that you should be like trying to impress upon people, that you have the skill versus the age. Because again, they're not going to discriminate against you based on your age. They're going to discriminate against you based on your lack of experience in software engineering. And so that's the first thing that you got to worry about. Don't worry about like the fact that you're older, because there are going to be some advantages in that HR folks are going to get points for interviewing people that are over a certain age. There are returnship programs where you only qualify if you've been out of the job force for a while. And so you qualify for some unique opportunities. And there's probably just as many opportunities where someone just like, oh man, you're not a cultural fit. We're all in our early 20s and we like to drink and party and have dogs run around the office. And so they might think that's not your jam. Maybe it is. Maybe you love doing cake stands and getting iced during the day, right? Like, who knows? But don't let that be a main concern. The main concern you should have is just getting better at your skill. And there's plenty of opportunity to transition. I've had many people that have been out of work for a while. They come back, they refresh their skills, and then they can do exceptionally well. Highest paid offer that we got from a student was someone who had been out of the industry for a while and then went back in, got a job at one of the big four, and made more than $200,000. And he was one of the older students I've had. So super doable. Yeah, one day. I'm not doing coffee with too many folks these days because of the whole Rona thing, but I'm sure we'll be back to doing meetups and all that good stuff pretty soon. All right. That's it. That's the end. We ran out of time. We will do this again next week. Every Tuesday, looking for work. Let someone you know this is a resource. If you do know anybody that's trying to land that first job in tech. Later.